We're live. I was waiting for it to come through. How's everybody doing? It is Sunday morning. I'm getting ready. We have another soccer game today, which I'm excited about. I love going and watching my sons play. Loved watching my older son play baseball. My younger son playing soccer. It's always good to get out with the family and stuff. But today we're talking about projects. So get your projects done. If it's sunny enough today, which I'm going to see what we're looking at for weather potential today. Partly cloudy in the 60s. I need some 80s days. That would be nice. But it might be enough to warm this thing up. So I want to paint the block and the pan and stuff. So if I'm hopefully I can do that after the game today, because I want to, after I paint it and it's dried, then I want to go ahead and get the crank laid in, the rods and pistons and all that stuff. So I want to get that done to have the short block at the very least assembled. And then once you get that going, then, stick the cam in and all that stuff. That's just stuff. That's just nothing. It just goes on, all but assembles itself. So that's my project I want to get done. Hopefully you guys have something going on. If you do, sound off. Please let me know if you're working on something today, what you're working on, or if you plan on working on something this week also, please let me know what that is. That's always good. So we can motivate each other and help each other get that stuff done. The thumbnail that I put up today is a turbo, probably an S475, I'm thinking, with a water meth injection. It's one of the photos I took for a magazine story that I did way back. I probably did a video using that possibly as a thumbnail also, but it's just the mist that is produced by a water meth injection system. This was a snow performance, like boost cooler deal. And it works good, and it shows the fine mist and the angle of attack, basically, of the discharge. But the question isn't that. We know what it does, and it can improve charge cooling. And if you have, depending on your percentage of methanol, it can also help with octane, which also can help suppress detonation. The water does that. The temperature does that. So it can be good stuff. The problem that I have personally with water meth or in the testing that I've done, the question I always have, because of the results we've gotten, is distribution. So when we did the test for engine masters, and when I've done many other tests, my concern was always, look, if you're, and it's the same thing with when we're injecting nitrous and fuel, like in a wet fogger setup, which I've had videos up on distribution for that as well. When you inject all that into, let's say, an LS, but there are other long runner intake manifolds. The Coyote is a good example. The Hemi, all of these things are similar because they know that this kind of manifold has really good power production, because the intake manifold, the runner length primarily, is designed to operate effectively in a given RPM range. So they know that they can make lots of average power if they do that. And then even more so if they do a dual runner, like with the Hemi, where they do a long and a short version, so that they can make it good here and then also here, because we've changed that. Here's the concern with water methanol injection, and that's that it doesn't all get, after having to go through an intake manifold that was designed only to flow airflow, it has trouble getting to all of the cylinders evenly. The air and the fuel just don't want to, the fuel, the water and the methanol in this case, don't want to go in and follow the path that the air follows without hitting things, because when the air hits it, it just like moves off. But when water hits it, it like comes out of a suspension and then puddles up. And so now that percentage that was there doesn't have the airflow that was there, and the water meth consistency is not the same anymore. Some of that has gone away. So you don't have the same amount. So what happens ultimately is that it all doesn't find its way evenly into all of the cylinders. And we showed that when we did the testing, that there was not a change in temperature that was anywhere consistent with the and we didn't do that with 802s, but we should have. I did that with 802s on the fuel and the nitrous testing that showed that that's not consistent with even cylinder distribution. And in fact, the intake manifold itself doesn't have even distribution. Neither does a carbureted manifold. None of these are really great. The way to get that is individual port injection with EFI, because then you can have, if the intake manifold runners are all the same and they're evenly producing and offering the same amount of airflow and a reflected wave and all that, so that the cylinders would then therefore want to or be forced to produce the same amount of power, you could then supply the same amount of fuel and have, the motor is making an even amount of power in every cylinder, and it's supplied the right amount of fuel, the right amount of timing, and everybody's happy. That's not happening with water methanol injection. If you run water methanol injection through these long runner manifolds, it doesn't get to all the cylinders evenly. There's no way that can, going through this labyrinth of airflow, which the air has no problem getting through, but because the air is just being drawn from the common plenum and then being fed by the throttle body, it's not designed to have air or water and methanol go through and then find its way through all of that stuff. Look like Jackie Chan there going. So it doesn't do that. So we know that it doesn't. So here's the problem, or here's the question, and this is going to be our poll for today. Will will injection in front of a turbo improve the distribution of water methanol in the motor? So I'm not concerned with will injection in front of the turbo improve the distribution of water meth injection? Well, we don't have to have that second one. Will injection in front of the turbo improve the distribution of water methanol in the motor? So if we inject it before the turbo, I'm not concerned with how it affects the compressor mapping of the turbo or the efficiency of the turbo. I'm not interested in that. I am interested in that, and we like that happens. But that's not the question. The question is, if we inject it before the turbo, and we will assume in this question that this is a non-intercooled version, because if it's an intercooled version, the answer is going to be no. Because the water methanol is going to hit the edges of the intercooler and it's going to puddle in the tank. That's definitely going to happen. So if we have a non-intercooled version, and hopefully we have some kind of short distance between the discharge tube of the turbo and the throttle body, and we inject the water methanol in the turbo, will that improve distribution in the motor? And so that for people that are having a hard time understanding this, the idea is that the turbo should slice this stuff up and make the atomization even greater and the particles smaller. And so they would be more likely to stay in suspension. So will that actually happen? And will we get a better distribution because of these smaller particles once it goes into the manifold and ultimately into each of the cylinders? Will that happen? Can we improve that by doing it before the turbo? So we'll see what people have to say. It's a little bit of a thought problem this morning. Projects getting all the snow plows ready for winter, right? Yeah, that's coming. They would cavitate on the impeller. It is being used. People are definitely doing it in front of the turbo. I need to install upper and lower control arms on my 08 Ram. That's good. On your Ram, are the bushings worn out on them? Had a timing chain break on an interference motor. Got some valve problems. Been told to use Scotch-Brite and sand down the impact marks on the pistons. Yeah, we just use a whizzy wheel, not a whizzy wheel, but like a sanding disc and do that, or the cartridges that you use for porting, the sanding rolls, that all works. And just get it so the edges are not there. Why can't you just spray it into the intercooler itself? You could spray it on the other side of the intercooler, but not before the intercooler. Richard, I'm building a low buck Mark IV 454. I can't justify a 2000-ish roller cam swap. Yeah, I wouldn't do that. Have you or anyone had any good luck Chevy performance flat tappet lifters? Yeah, we've used those before. I don't know what kind of condition they're in now because it's been a long time since we've used them. But proper preparation goes a long way for those. Lots and lots of zinc. It's high zinc oil, break-in oil style, and then zinc additive. And then I like to coat the lifters and the cam lobes with assembly lube before I run it. And then when you break it in, we break it in with light springs. Everything that you could do to improve the chances of the thing, because usually the camshaft goes bad right away, or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, usually it lasts for a long time. Methanol works better after the forced induction since the air is hotter, so it's taking more of the temperature out. This is not really that question. And I think actually what happens is I think we get better cooling before the turbo. You can also use multiple smaller nozzles. Yeah, port injection, basically individual port injection for and to even out the amount supplied to the motor is a really good idea. But that's not the question. I found that if you use straight methanol, you have relative ambient temperatures. With a fog, it will be evaporated into the plenum and turns into a gas. Turning from a liquid into a gas requires a boiling point. So you're saying that you reach the boiling point of methanol in the intake manifold? My wife thinks we're a bunch of tweakers because she heard us discussing water meth. Yeah. Uneven distribution can be a receipt for a bad day. Why, when you're doing things like this, port injection is the only way to go, especially with big horsepower gains? I think the farther you get up in power and the higher you get up in boost and the more you're pushing the envelope, the more these things become critical. We look at that when we did the nitrous testing. If you run a 100 shot or 125 shot with a plate or a single nozzle in front of the throttle body where it's a wet fogger and you're spraying fuel and nitrous into the motor, even into a long runner truck manifold or Coyote or Hemi, it works. It's not ideal and the distribution is not ideal, but it's not bad enough to ruin a motor. But as you go up in the amount of nitrous and fuel, especially that you're supplying, you run into more problems. So the recommendation for that setup for either a plate system or a fogger nozzle is to add the fuel with the injectors and then just spray nitrous through the intake manifold. That way you're getting the right amount of fuel, you're getting in all the cylinders, and you're just adding the nitrous, which is going in as a gas anyway. And it's much more likely that it finds its way evenly into all the cylinders. I work with big ammonia screw compressors, and the actual change in direction acts as an oil separator. You can do the same with compressed sharp edges in the direction and sling and separate water. What is meant by distribution? The distribution in the individual cylinders. So do you make it, because right now we know that when you inject water methanol into a long runner manifold, the distribution is not even. It doesn't go, the same amount doesn't go into all the cylinders. Does this improve that? Does running it through the turbo first allow it to go into the cylinders evenly? Yeah, Michael, this is on a non-intercooled version. All my Grand National buddies swear by straight 100% methanol since it evaporates immediately. There is definitely cooling to be had from that. I ran straight ice cold water pre-turbo on my non-intercooled 5.3. So you're adding, are you running methanol Durasled on that also, or just water injection? Richard, have you ever added a quart of oil in a pan for additional crank windage to break the cam in? Why would that help? Water methanol isn't a method of decreasing air temperature. It doesn't do that. Injector placement on turbos. Do you want to cool the intake charge and try to get all the fuel in while the intake valve is open and keep cooling in the cylinder? We know that injector placement will change charge cooling effect, and we know that it will add more power if you put the injector farther away from the valve. We have seen that happen many, many times. So we know it does that. So 8, you think it improves distribution 1%? Then that's a yes, right? If you have knock sensors and poor distribution, does that mean knock will just occur at lower timing than if it all got even distribution? Yeah, if it's causing detonation in one cylinder, it would recognize that and still probably pull timing. I don't know if it's just going to pull timing in an individual cylinder. I don't know how sophisticated it is. To be clear, we're talking about distilled water. It should be, but probably not in a lot of cases. I would assume static charge within the intercooler will hold on to water, negating some of the effects of the injection. We're not talking about an intercooled, we're talking about a non-intercooled version. It would, if it was, we talked about that before detonation, is that if this was an intercooled version, like if we were trying to get the water meth to go through an air-to-air intercooler, let's say, it would hit the edges of the way an intercooler is designed, and it would pool water in the tank. We talked about that. Mine is after the turbo and 8 inches from the throttle body. That's a pretty normal thing in the discharge tube. Alex is doing some good water meth testing. Check out the channel. Water or methanol will evaporate at temperatures far below their boiling points. Yeah, but evaporation is going to take a long time though, right? It has to help at least a little bit. It doesn't have to. There is also the no answer. Randall, we experimented with this in the 70s, 80s on top alcohol engines. We ran to the point of the water alcohol weight, straightening the blades of the compressor wheel. That's also a potential problem, is that you wear the blades out or damage the blades if you are injecting a solid liquid mass at the blades that are spinning very, very fast. So that's definitely a possibility. The particles hitting the blade are not really going to decrease the turbo's efficiency from drag. Usually this improves the turbo by injecting it in front of the turbo. But That's not the question. The question is distribution. I know methanol cools air temps a lot better after roots blower than before. Really? So running like methanol carburetors or even E85 carburetors before a roots blower has a really big effect on temperature. I would think much better than injecting it in the lower manifold before the lower short runner manifold before going into the cylinder. I think it would be better having it go through the blower. Yeah, detonation. We're not even talking about what it does in terms of power. We're only talking about the question is only about distribution. Would it get it through a long runner manifold better? There's some videos of people dumping water into compressors, like tons of tons of water. Does it hydrolock the turbo? Hawaii's in the house. Man, I wish I was there. I want to get a stainless impeller wheel. Crushed ice for margaritas. Propane carburetors get cold. The tops of the if you run even E85, but certainly methanol, if you run that through a roots blower, it's not uncommon to see the thing condensation and have the thing to be really cold to the touch. Yeah, Rusty, if yours is fuel injected, you're not getting cooling going through the blower usually on the EFI stuff. If it's port injected, then the blower is just doing all of the air moving and heating without fuel going through it. Hopefully it has an intercooler though, right? I voted no because I have no idea what the question means. I run water only injection before the turbo my 3800. Are you doing that on your Bonneville car? Are you doing that because you are running it in a gas class and not a fuel class? Duracell is straight water with no methanol. I tried straight methanol, 50-50 mix, and then straight water. I got better track times on the ice water. The IETs are the lowest on straight water. We put fuel down the top of the rotors, on top of the blower to seal the rotors and lubricate. Yeah, on those roots blowers, you need to have. I don't think on the twin screws though, but maybe you have to have lubrication for the blowers, for the rotors. I'd like to see the logs on that water only run. Me too, Karen. Does methanol cool down the turbo itself? It would be interesting to see what the change in temperature of the turbo itself is, because turbos, even on the compressor side, definitely get hot. And it's interesting that I don't ever hear people talk about heat soaking the turbo because you can't touch the compressor side of a turbo, and yet the spinny part is still pretty cold, where all the air is going through. Ignore the compressor, just the fact that it's going further upstream. That's not what this question is about. Not plugging myself, but I design open source standalone ECUs. I'd like to send you one. The thing with ECUs is obviously I could run it, but I'm not going to demonstrate what an ECU will do because I run timing and air fuel at wide open throttle, which anything from a factory to some throw together thing, all of them will do that. And so I'm not really taxing what a system would do, what its capability is, because that's found out more if you're actually out drag racing or driving or those kinds of things where all of the other features of a standalone ECU become, much more beneficial. I'm trying to think of a system that I have that I want to run that I can't run with what I have. Maybe the 3-cylinder sprint motor. I'm not working on my project because my love is sleeping on me. Is she watching the show too? I did a 70/30 water meth mix on a hot air Buick and got the best temp reduction, but had to add timing to get the power back. That's a good excuse, Admiral. I can confirm that injecting after the supercharger is better. In my car with an Eaton M112, injecting before the blower did nothing to reduce the temperature. I don't know how that's possible. Isopropyl alcohol, probably, but I don't know what the flash point of that is. Detonation, I know that you're not asking for anything. I don't want a gift if it's not something I'm going to use. I'd rather have you get it into the hands of somebody that's actually going to use it. If it's something that I can use, I just need to figure out. I would rather just have you send me an email and show me what it is so I can figure out if it's something that I can apply somewhere. And also primarily if it's beneficial for the viewers. How much do you think a header coating would decrease underhood temperatures? I don't think actually very much. If we injected meth into the exhaust side, could it make the turbo run cooler and be beneficial? No, it won't do it because of that. In fact, that would be detrimental. You don't want the hot side to run cooler. Salty, the thing that you want to cool is the inlet side, not the exhaust side. Isopropyl alcohol does some things better than methanol. I don't think I've ever seen a direct test of that. I'm trying to remember going through all of my stuff if I've seen somebody try that. I don't know what is the cost of isopropyl alcohol. Is it like per gallon? Is it more or less than methanol is or than E85 is? We've also run pre-turbo water injection on a G production supercharged car at Bonneville. The car was a a gas car, yeah. My compound setup with where my cold side intake is located, I'm seeing as much as 7-degree change without methanol injection. Running 2 intercoolers, one large air to air, one large air to water. It's way more money. I buy in bulk for medical work. Okay. Robert, what is the 100? Is that would work best? And what is the 100% what? We buy 98% isopropyl alcohol work for less than $2 a gallon. Is it, what is the other 2%? Is it water? Richard, didn't you do a washer fluid versus boost? Yeah, I ran different levels of the washer fluid and then the boost juice. I didn't do straight methanol, which I could have, or but also I think I did the test on E85, so maybe it wasn't nearly as. And get what guys want to see is, well, you need to run at the edge of detonation on pump gas, and then you need to put this on there and see what it does. Does it give us 2 more degrees or 2 more pounds boost? I can't do that kind of test. Yeah, it will be 2% will be water. Crystal blue persuasion. Yep. The boost juice was better than the windshield washer fluids. Both the higher temperature stuff didn't really do much. It changes the temperature, but didn't really add any power. And then the -20 stuff or -30, which I'd have to go back and look and see what the picture is, didn't seem to do much. They did change the air fuel ratio, which we had to obviously readjust because some of that is fuel. So it changed that. It seemed to change the temperature, but didn't really change power. Pre-turbo water injection in a 3800 land speed car is to help keep intake temps and EGTs under control. This is a hot pipe car. The turbo is connected directly to the throttle body. Okay. You would definitely get more cooling that way then because you're increasing the amount of time that it's subjected to the cooling properties, which is good. Yeah, Dan, if you have to, it's hydroscopic, right? So if you have it in a fuel tank, it's gonna grab water, and it's gonna water inject itself. 8. When you say California windshield washer fluid 0 alcohol, that's not accurate. They they have different levels. Some of it is that, but not all of it is that. And it gets very cold in California too, and very hot. Scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. And I'm scrolling and I'm scrolling. Well, methanol wasn't a power adder, has lower temperature, and allowed you to add more timing, which equals more power. Yes and no. What if the thing already has enough timing in it, and which it did because we were already running E85. If we were doing that test on 91 and we could then add more timing if it would allow us to do that, then we could potentially pick up more power. The problem is if you don't have distribution and you're universally adding timing, you're adding it to a cylinder, which is going to be more susceptible to detonation. That's why we have the question that we have that's up right now is, does it help with distribution? Because I want even distribution. I want even distribution in all the cylinders for fuel and air. And then I want even distribution of any subsequent thing that I would be adding, water, methanol. If you're just adding water, you would even want even distribution of water injection to all the cylinders evenly, because if you're not improving them or adding the safety margin, adding the cooling that you would want in every cylinder. And if you're not doing that in every cylinder, it only takes one to damage the motor. And so that's my thought process for that. It'll grab a lot of water out of the air. No big deal for the car, but it's a big deal for chemistry labs. Ooh, snowmobiling in 2 weeks. Did you ever take it off some sweet jumps? Any benefits to running a water cooled turbo? Yes, definitely. The longevity of the turbo is greatly enhanced if you water cool the center section. It is good. The factory stuff, if you look at the factory, this is from back in the 80s, the 83, 84, I think is when it first came out. The turbo Dodge stuff, they had water cooled center sections, and those turbos last a long time. There's no, I don't think there's really any benefit in terms of charge cooling, but you're cooling the center section, which is where the bearings are. So you want to have that. It'd be nice to have a stabilized temperature there, but I don't think that's imparting any charge cooling from the heat soaking that goes on from the other stuff. People that talk about one state being better than another state are just foolish. That's just utter nonsense. We use intercoolers on each stage of compression and get rid of the heat. That's always a good idea. I think I'm going to run we've done this on Bonneville cars. So we're going to run a twin intercooled deal. So we use one intercooler to take a big chunk of the heat out and then use another intercooler like with ice water or something. And quite honestly, I would just use ice water in both of them so that you get maximum cooling. So you could cool it down from, let's say you had 350 degrees, and then you cool that down with ice water down to 100, and then you cool the 100 down to 60 or 50 or 40 or whatever it is, because you're using a 32-degree transfer medium. So as we get it colder and colder, we certainly can make it safer and safer and more powerful. Put chili bombs everywhere in the intake track. Yeah, it's just chili bombs for everybody. Look under your seat. You get a chili bomb. You get a chili bomb. Any way for us normals to lengthen the center section to keep it? So you want to you want to make it separate the hot side and the cold side, so there's no. Do you think that with the amount of airflow that's going through the cold side, that you're actually imparting, and with the speed of the air going through there, that you're actually imparting radiant heat from the hot side through the center section to the cold side and then to the air? You think that that's actually happening? And if it is, in a Formula One motor, worrying about those things that you might pick up from that in a Formula One motor, the level of things that they're looking for, where they're looking to squeeze the next 2 or 3 or 4 horsepower. Because now, if at their level, the amount of power, the amount of money that they will spend for each horsepower is way more than you would spend to get that in a normal kind of car. And also, at that level, they have looked at everything else. They've looked not just a little bit. They've looked not only at everything, but at everything at a very at a very finite level. They're trying to get everything out of everything. So they're looking at stuff like that. You don't need to look at stuff like that for your street car, because there are so many other areas that you could get big gains from, and you won't get big gains from that. We saw 150-degree drops in EGT by adding the pre-turbo water injection. No changes otherwise. You will see changes in EGTs from you're adding water, right? Yeah, from adding water into it, because water doesn't burn. So you're actually going to ultimately change the EGTs as well. Once we put water in there, we could lean on the car much harder, and it leaned out correctly. So, but this is a non-intercooled car. I'm curious why you don't have an air-to-water intercooler between the turbo and because if you put an air-to-water intercooler in there, it would work a lot better than your water injection does. If you ran an air-to-water intercooler and you had ice water running through it, you would make 100 more horsepower than you are making now with water injection. When everybody has 998 horsepower and you go on television, you're going to spend the millions. If you look at, I remember Brule telling me, and I forgot what the number was, but he was talking to Rare Morrison or one of these guys, and they were talking about how much money during a season, the amount of money that they spend on their program, and that the amount of power that they gain during that year during the development program, and then you break it down to 10 or 20 or 50 or 100,000 per horsepower that they gain. It's an astronomical amount, and that's the thing, is that where they're looking and how they're looking and what they're looking at, because you can't just, I'm going to bolt airflow research heads on here and look, there's 30 or 40 horsepower, or Joe Schmo's camera or whatever. They're way beyond that. So the amount of time and effort and energy that they have to spend finding more power for that combination within their rules limit, it's very, very expensive. And that stuff doesn't really carry over to what the average guy needs to do in his average guy project buildup, because he can find huge chunks of power. It's like worrying about, on my junkyard 706 headed 5.3, and I'm putting a turbo on it. What do I need to do on the valve job? You need to not be concerned with your valve job. I know all the valve job guys are going to jump up and down and say, oh yeah, there's a huge power there. No, there's not. There's not relative huge power there. What there is relative huge power from is you putting a cam and springs and a turbo on there, and then go on your way, because the turbo is going to dictate the power, not the valve job. And that's what I'm talking about. Look at the big things first and get the big gains that don't cost a lot of money, get the low hanging fruit, and then go on with other things. And F1 sometimes gives up horsepower for aerodynamics. Yeah, because their engine concerns are also their packaging concerns. So if they choose something that's going to add power, but it changed the aero, they might not do it. I was told a smaller crank pulley will free it by slowing down some accessories. Yeah, it can do that. It can definitely do that, especially if the crank pulley is driving all of the other accessories, which is normally the case. Sometimes you have multiple pulleys on there that are doing that on the crank, like the LS does for the AC. But if you spin them slower, there will be less parasitic loss associated with driving those different pulleys or different accessories. So if you slow the water pump down, which is definitely a drag, slow the power steering down, which is definitely a drag, the thing you have to be concerned with is slowing the alternator down. I remember having underdrive pulleys on my Mustang, and when you're cruising around down at the beach, like I was down at Newport Beach, at slow speeds, the water pump slows down. So sometimes it makes it more prone to overheating and stop and go traffic. And also your alternator slows way down, and that stops the charging system doesn't work as well. So, so there's a bunch of battery draw. There are trade-offs. So, big lady, you tried an air to water intercooler and it didn't work, and then just water injection worked? Getaway's out. Mike, yeah, we were talking about that last night. Detonation, I ditched the underdrive for the same reason, overheating at stoplights and charging issues. It does do that. It's amazing how much it changes, especially because you go from a guy that wants, oh, I'm going to have a 3% underdrive or a 5% or a 10 or a 15. Well, then more is obviously better. And then pretty soon your accessories are not even spinning. Have you ever done any turbo versus ProCharger vids? Yes. Lots of them. Go look at all of the, I have 3 or 4 videos up where I compared turbos and blowers and all of them. So you can see what they do. Basically, a ProCharger has a rising boost curve and a turbo has a much more average boost curve. So it makes a lot more power in the middle part of the curve, and it makes more peak power because at any given boost level, the turbo makes more power because you have power losses associated with driving a supercharger. Not just a ProCharger, but any centrifugal supercharger, really any supercharger at all, whether it's a roots blower or a twin screw or a positive or a centrifugal, they all require power to drive them, but the turbo does not. So the turbo at any given boost level will make more power than the superchargers do. I've seen nitrous sprayed on the outside of the intercooler. I did that test. I was debating with a work buddy that my EGT location doesn't really matter if it's before or after the hot side. My O2 reads 1200 degrees, which comes after the hot side. He thinks it's wrong. Your EGT placement, if it's after the turbo, will definitely change with the length of the pipe. The farther it is away, the more cooling it has. So your reading is going to be different at any given O2. When we read our O2 EGT, when we read EGTs on like a naturally aspirated deal or a supercharged deal, we're reading it in the header a few inches out from the head. You can read it there. You can read it somewhere in the tube if you have a Y pipe. You can read it after the turbo on the down pipe. Just know that you have to correlate whatever that reading is with what's happening in the motor and then go, okay, this is normal for this position, and then adjust from there. So if you have that position, you would have to test it in multiple positions and go, okay, look, if I change the timing 4 degrees, either way, let's say you have enough swing to be able to do that from your middle point. Here's what happens. Okay, here's what happens when the EGT is in this spot. Here's what happens when it's in this spot. Here's what happens when it's in this spot. It either does the same thing, or the temperature is higher here than it is here and than it's here. But when I change the timing, it goes up this amount here, and it goes up this amount here, and it goes up this amount here. Just figure out what your normal is, and then what good is, and then what bad is. I love it when some guys tell me that the factory is setting his engines up to burn extra fuel and change the setting into it, and it will magically double MPG. If they could magically double MPG, they would sell a lot more vehicles. And so they would be doing that. Do any drag racing sanctioning bodies frown upon external spray? Yeah, they would probably. I think that some guys here were saying that they even frown upon the AC stuff because you're going to have condensation water dripping off of that, so they don't even like that. Nobody wants any sort of liquid on their on the racing surface. Dan, yes, sprung versus unsprung versus reciprocating weight. John, you have a question. I have a LS2 turbo. I have a nitrous kit. My question is, can I use a dry shot to spool my turbo as long as you add the fuel? But quite honestly, I wouldn't put it in front of the turbo. I would put it very close to the manifold, because then the response rate of the turbo will go up. You're spooling the turbo not from injecting something into the spinny part of the turbo. You're going to improve boost response from having more low speed power, which is what a 50 shot is going to do for you. So I'd put it as close as you can to the intake manifold. Isn't like 100 pounds of weight savings drops ET a tenth? It depends on what you're saving it from. If you have a 1,500 pound car and you drop 100 pounds off of it, it's going to change it more than that. And also, if you drop it 100 pounds from a 5,000 pound car or 6,000 pound car, it's not going to drop it nearly as much. Big lady, if you have a setup and it's working and you're setting records with it, then I would just keep using whatever you're doing. John, I would do it after the MAF. I would do it right before the throttle body, after the MAF. Do it. I mean, if you have I don't know what kind of kit you have. Some kits have a spacer plate between the throttle body and the intake. I would do it there. If it's a nozzle, I like it in front of the throttle body, just in front of the throttle body, because that way, if the thing sticks open for some reason, which would be very, very rare, but if it did, you close the throttle and it won't spray nitrous in there anymore. So if you have a nozzle, I just put it in the discharge tube right in front of the throttle body, but after the MAF. A hot mess. What blower are you running on there? And the thing that would be nice about nitrous is if you're going to replace the blower with some kind of longer runner intake manifold, so you enhance low speed power production anyway, something that the blower may not have. I don't know what blower you're using. I'm picturing a roots blower with a short runner intake manifold. So if you take that off and put a long runner intake manifold on it, you'll gain low speed power, not like the blower added, but you'll gain low speed power relative to the intake manifold that you're using. And then with nitrous, you can start out with a 50 shot or a 100 shot or whatever, wherever starting point you want, and then adjust from there. Go, oh, like I want it to be even more responsive. So I want to go from a 50 to 100 or to a 75 and then to 100 and go up in small increments and test it and see if it works. Build my first turbo engine. Is it possible to choose a wastegate that's too large for the application? That's not the side that you have to worry about. You have to worry about it being too small. Too big of a wastegate is not going to do anything. What is better for reading air fuel? An O2 sensor is better for reading air fuel. An EGT doesn't tell you specifically about air fuel ratio. An EGT just tells you temperature, which you can adjust with timing. If you adjust timing, it doesn't necessarily change air fuel, but it definitely will change EGT. EGTs are typically type Ks, right? Yeah, Dan, so they're not going to react. I've also used straight water on my compound turbo Ford Festiva. Very cool. Water before the low pressure and in between stages with success. Hot pipe E85 car. Oh, a maxed out M62. It's underdriven, so I'm not over spooling the turbo and checking her out at 3,000 RPM. So I would imagine you have a good sized turbo then because of that. So Jamie, you did a windshield washer injection on your 66 Ford? Big Lady also ran the 85 in the same configuration on the Festiva as part of the fuel system with similar success to straight water. Water can't add any power. E85 will definitely add power. So something else is going on there. Good morning, Richard. Will the injected fuel pool inside the intercooler? It would, but in our case, we had talked about, this is a non-intercooled version. Can you use RC car fuel, nitromethane to cool the? You could. It'd be pretty expensive to do that, right? And wow, look at our poll. Will injection in front of a turbo improve distribution of the water methanol in the motor? 50% saying yes, 50% saying no. Maybe people are, is it really that divided? Intake is a long runner intake with 4 laminate, of course. Okay, cool. GT3582, air to water intercooler. Oh, that seems right. Do we know the answer? I would suspect it would help a little bit. I don't know. It'd be you'd be measuring the little thing here, I think. I would like to see what it did injecting it, like it right in front of the and I'm wondering if I'm thinking that the length of the discharge tube would also have an effect on this. So not having an intercooler in the setup is a given. But when you don't have an intercooler, a lot of times you position the turbo close to the throttle body and then have, like one of the guys was saying here, he has the turbo just blowing right into the throttle body. That would be the shortest version. But if the turbo is mounted to the side, you have some kind of simple, fairly short, a few inches, 90-degree elbow or 45 or wherever the turbo's position could be straight in front of some short section of pipe going from the turbo, because a lot of times the turbo is not sized, the discharge of the turbo is not sized the same as the throttle body or the intake opening. So you have some step up or step down kind of thing. So you'd put the discharge, the water meth there versus in the turbo. So the distance from one to the other would not be that great. So I think if the discharge was really long and we put it in one spot and then the other spot, I think do you have more time for fuel to come out, or for the air fuel or the water fuel combination to come out of suspension? And the more turns it hits, does it have more time to come out of suspension before it goes into this long runner intake manifold? And then when it's hitting and doing all that in there, is it coming out of suspension and puddling? And also the time element. This wasn't part of the distribution thing, but the time element for charge cooling, I'm told that from a charge cooling standpoint, injecting it into the compressor is better. And that then we also see gains from a change in efficiency of the turbo. And if that's the case, if we have two things happening, which one of them is the more? Are they even? Is it skewed way one way more than the other? All of that would be lots and lots of testing. Yeah, big beans. I wouldn't do it. I mean, I would do it on the dyno for a test just to see what it did. But if I was setting up my setup for like a street car or even a street strip car, I wouldn't run it in front of the turbo because it will damage the turbo. Have you tested a Victor Jr. intake manifold on a 462 valve? No, that wasn't around when I was doing the intake testing. Have you ever tested injector discharge temperature with the change in pressure? So for changing the fuel pressure from 40 psi to 60 psi, does it change the temperature of the fuel? We did do a change. I did do a test where we changed the temperature of the fuel, which you think would happen under compression anyway, but I didn't see a change in power from the change in temperature of the fuel. Yeah, Dan, I think the question is that if you change the pressure and you're compressing the fuel, which you really can't do because it's a liquid, Would there be a change in temperature from the discharge? I don't think that there would be. And when we actually tested a change in temperature of the fuel that we put into the system, we didn't really see a change in power. I've never run anything on nitromethane. A buddy and I did windshield washer sprayer to the radiator trick on a motorhome for long pulls up hills. So you were spraying the radiator to help the cooling system work better? For long pulls on a motorhome on a gas motor, you should also spray a little bit of that into the carburetor or into the fuel, into the inlet track. Injection before the turbo would help with underhood temps? I don't think it would change underhood temps. My guess is you're not radiating heat from the discharge side of the tube out into the engine compartment. Be more likely that it goes the other way. What about methanol injection on a rear turbo on a crew cab that's like 20 feet long? I would inject it near the manifold. So, Mike, I'm trying to scroll back and see what you're talking about. Cooling down the compressor. How are you cooling down the compressor? Could you test an 5-liter Mustang? So you want the stock HO upper and lower intake using an NOS upper lower plate for injection pump versus E85. So you want to run nitrous on it or something? What is it you're wanting to test? The beginning of runner injectors or standoff injectors give you a carb-like cooling effect. Yes, moving the injector position away from the intake valve, like in the runner, definitely adds power. BMW M4 GTS has water injection in the intake manifold. When activated, boost is also increased 25%. So when you increase boost 25%, that's probably going to get a good gain in power, right? I would imagine that that's going to be good. One more minute. It's morning. We got an extra hour, which is awesome. When it comes to cooling, think intercooler. Think intercooler. Just keep swimming. Just keep boosting. More and more intercooling, and then ice water. Or if you could get something colder than that, would be even better. Okay, guys, time to go. Thank you all for showing up in the morning session. It is Sunday. I'll be back tonight for our live feed at 7 p.m. And in the meantime, I'm going to put up a video on centrifugal superchargers. So please watch and enjoy. Thank you guys all. See you tonight. Bow, 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 bow.